Hi, welcome back to the Vulgar Skill. I'm Ryan Neal. It's been a long time since my last video, and I'm very sorry for that. That's been due to a few factors. In January, I contracted COVID-19, which caused a lot of problems with my health. The main issue is that I sometimes find it difficult to breathe and really get air into my lungs because my lungs were damaged. And sometimes I have balance and equilibrium issues due to the virus sometimes affecting the inner ear. Those are things that are obviously very important in fencing, especially if I'm swinging montante or going at speed, and it makes it very difficult to fence. Additionally, I kind of stopped having joy in my training. What I mean by that is I liked training when I was doing it, but my motivation sank very low for me to get started on it, to overcome that inertia. I mentally kind of put myself in a bad place. And if you've ever had illness or a chronic health condition that interferes with your training, it can be very hard to enjoy training because you feel like your body's constantly betraying you. It will no longer do things you know it can and that you want it to do. And thankfully, with the aid of medical treatment of the symptoms and some therapy and some sports psychology methodologies, I'm currently on the upswing and really battling back. It's an uphill struggle, but I'm getting there. I'm thankful for those of you who've subscribed, even though I haven't been able to put anything out lately, and who continue to view my content. I really appreciate that more than I can convey because growing the awareness of Godinho's art was my number one goal in starting this, and it's appreciated, so thank you. Now on to a less maudlin topic. Godinho's Two Swords is a big passion of mine, and probably my favorite thing in historical sources. I fence with it whenever I get the choice of weapons, and it's phenomenally fun to do. If I have, like, SCA, it's like, what's your weapon choice? Case of swords. Two swords, baby. Every time. LARP, two swords. I always pick it. All the jumping, spinning, flashy two sword stuff is in Godinho. And not really any other two sword source that's historical I think of has the jumping, spinning, flashy stuff as much. And I know I like that it works. I've tested it and it works, but it works with style. And winning with style is important to me. I want to cause swooning wherever I fence, and fainting at just the sheer beauty of what I do. Like the Montante, Godinho's Two Swords is taught via rules, which are solo exercises, which got to give you a movement pattern for a situation and a cutting pattern. In this case, our situation is we're attacked in front in a somewhat narrow street. I'm going to give you multiple interpretations when I can and attempt to give insights of my own. Godinho's Two Swords can be kind of finicky because he has positions that are idiosyncratic to the two swords, and it can be hard to interpret sometimes. But let's go ahead and take a look at some possible interpretations of this first rule. Thank you. First, you're going to start with the sword in your right hand, nails down over the head. The sword in the left arm is withdrawn below that of the right arm. Godinho doesn't say withdrawn nails up or withdrawn nails down. And it would seem to be the case that if he meant that, he would have specified that. But Godinho is also vague. So if you're finding this is working for you, go ahead. But I'm going to explain my reasoning in a second. So nails down above the head and withdrawn below the arm. The left leg is going to take a step. The left arm is going to deliver a revés. The right arm is going to deliver a tajo. You're going to end with the arms, with the left arm now nails down above the head and the right arm withdrawn below the arm. So when making these cuts, Godinho doesn't specify the angle. If it's relevant to your situation and they're open there, you can cut these both rising if you want, ending nails down above the head and withdrawn below the arm. Another possibility here is, of course, to cut them very wide if you're really sweeping out. And this sword doesn't need to make a second revés or continue this revés. It just has to end here. So if you feel better, just kind of placing it or cutting
continuing your cut around to get to that position, go ahead and do that, but it's not necessary. If you could get there by placing, that is perfectly fine. So now we're in this exchange position, and we're going to step with our right foot in. Right arm's going to revés, left arm's going to tajo, and we're back where we started. So essentially, in our somewhat narrow street here, we can either kind of advance almost straight-footed walking or angling, depending on your situation, how many people you're fighting. But you basically can walk forward, throwing these cuts continuously as you go. Now, another sort of possible interpretation of this, not just in terms of cutting angle, which I said you can have a lot of variety with, you can also almost weave it. And what I mean by that is this cuts a revés, this cuts a tajo, and then this cuts a revés and tajo. Weaving it smoothly. What sort of helps if you want to do that sort of smooth weave, because again, this arm starts the revés, this arm starts the tajo, and this arm has to start the revés, is your nails down position above your head. You already kind of start that going a little early, but then this revés goes. So it's going, this revés goes, this revés goes, and so on as you advance, cutting at your target. Godinho says this can also be done with thrusts, with the sword below and nails up, and the sword above nails down, putting the foot in each time. So essentially something like this, where you make like almost a wedge with your swords. You could also do it like this, but I prefer to make a wedge just because that covers more ground. It keeps me safe if people are attacking me. Kind of creates a very large space for their swords to move through. This kind of cuts it down here, here. Another possible interpretation of this is we start in our same position. This gives a nails down thrust. This gives a nails up thrust. And then we're back reversed, nails down, nails up. And we essentially thrust instead of cut, but almost in that same kind of weaving pattern. It covers you less, and it's a little more situational. Like, why wouldn't I want both swords forward if I'm thrusting? And Godinho says with the thrusting rule, it's really for more 1 or 2 people. So I'm not as concerned with like getting this flow going and covering as much space as I am with cuts. And that's, so I tend to favor this one as the thrusting rule. The other thrusting rule he gives is you could walk down throwing nails down punching thrusts. And when I execute a punching thrust, it is described better in his single sword section, but it's the idea that this thrust is gaining air, as he says, it's gaining power, and then I'm driving forward and throwing this with all my might, 1 and 2. I try to time it generally so that this foot, when it steps, that nails down thrust occurs, and then as this back foot comes to join it, the second one comes, 1, 2. Using the hips and everything. I'm not throwing it that hard right now because I have some fatigue and health issues that are keeping me from doing it as hard as I can. But Godinho says, if you doubt the power of this thrust, go do it against a wall. And you'll feel how powerful this thrust can be when you really put your hips in and you punch with it. Now, the reason with the cutting rule that I don't start here and throw like revés tajo, even though that keeps me safe, the issues I kind of have with that interpretation are a few. One, if I kind of want to keep my points online, which a lot of people like this rule because this interpretation, because it keeps your points online, what inevitably happens is you see when I throw my cut to keep my point online, I wind up dragging the tip. So my cut it ends like this as opposed to like this. And while that will make somebody bleed and can indeed kill them, it's a suboptimal cut. It tends to not have as much velocity as it could. It tends to get stuck in targets. So in general, I'm a big proponent of first cut first. So when you cut, I'm finished with my cuts. And then I get back into that position rather than already be thinking about that end position, because if you, again, you think about that end position, you'll drag the tip, you may even T-Rex your arms a bit, and I personally don't like it. Additionally, if I'm throwing cuts, this is, unless you have phenomenal grip strength, this becomes pretty hard to power this cut from such a short range. And there are people who have good short cut range, but it's harder to do, requires a lot of core strength and a lot of good cutting mechanics, and under pressure is more difficult to perform. One final note here is on power generation. And I found this through cutting practice. When you throw these cuts, if you're already expended all your energy on this revés, and that you have nothing left in your hips to finish the cut, this cut will suffer usually and it will fail. Even through a relatively thin target, this one will make it and this one won't, because by the time you've finished this cut, your hips kind of run out of steam. So what you generally need to kind of practice, if you're practicing cutting for power, and if all your cuts in this are for real as opposed to scary whirling blades, that adds even more threat. It makes it even more optimal. This will work if you're just swinging swords wildly, or even in the pattern, and it'll scare people. But to make it even better, your hips should not be already expended here. The hips finish there. Likewise, your hips should not already be expended here. Your hips finish there. And so on. Weaving. And even I struggle with this still, trying to get this down. But I think it's been really informed by my cutting practice that if you want to cut with all the cuts, you have to really focus on how your hips coordinate with each sword, as opposed to just making that first cut like the best cut ever, then the second one kind of an afterthought. I think that is the real challenge of two-sword cutting more than it is trying to be ambidextrous. I'm relatively ambidextrous. I'm a natural lefty, but I use my right hand a lot in fencing because I teach, and also to challenge myself. And because we live in a right-handed world, lefties use their right hand more than righties use their left hand. So that's in general my thoughts on this first rule. If you have any questions, please direct them in the comments below, and thank you.